unprocessed grief. When someone does not process it, where does it go? I see how it comes out, but could you describe maybe how it would go in and what it's like maybe physically, somatically in the body or psychologically, emotionally?
Well, people get stuck and they've held on to something for so many years and they haven't been able to process it. And it does cause separation. It causes affairs. It causes health issues, maybe cancer, other illnesses. It causes problems with their kids if they're parents. It causes problems with colleagues. But it shows up in so many different ways and they think they can stuff it. But it comes up through music, through food, through other traditions and rituals and birthdays and holidays, and it just shows up in their life every single day, and sometimes they don't even know it. And so when they're depressed or they're going to see a psychologist or counselor, and there's nothing wrong with that, but they don't understand what's going on, and they got fired from their job, or they just had this amazing relationship and it didn't work out, or they can't understand their teenager, it's because they're holding on to that. It's just what I've learned. It's not my opinion, or I'm not suggesting it. It's just what I've learned after seeing thousands of people, their stories. And they're like, "I wish I would have done this." And there was a research by Weir in 2012 and then again in 2019. It was the 5 regrets of human beings. And the number one thing is, I wish I was able to express myself more, because these people are dying and they wish they were able to express themselves more. So along with your question, it's regrets. I wish I would have been able to express myself more, either when I was younger, as a mid-adult, when I was married, or now that I'm on hospice, or now that I'm older. I don't know. They don't know what to do with it because no one taught them, and they kept pushing it away all these years. And so now they have these regrets and they just don't know what to do with them. And again, I have to use the word stuck because I've heard it so many times.
Yeah, it is sad, right? Because in the moment or at the time, you think it's just normal to not process it. You don't feel those repercussions. And then by the time you do realize it, it's often too late. Either that relationship that you have with that person has disintegrated, it's not the same, or there's so much pain and pent up disconnection that you couldn't make up for the lost time. And you have to make peace with that. I think for a lot of men too, even though it's becoming more normal to acknowledge that, I think especially in social circles with other men, it's still not very normalized. At least for me, I think you're right that women model it more, and that's because I think socially, when they're bonding, they're just sharing what's happening, which is kind of the gateway to them processing what's happening. And I think for men, it's more of this catch up, or you talk about, the sports or something. And so it kind of prevents you from going there. But I know for me, it would be very strange times where the grief would show up, where I'd be resistant to something related to, what my wife was bringing up, and I was holding on so hard to try to, give backlash. I just did not know why. And then I kind of peeked beneath the hood, and I actually did also lose my dad when I was 11 to cancer. And I realized so much of that unprocessed grief of missing was causing this sense of desire for power and like control. Like I really, in that moment, wanted something that I felt like I lost and I couldn't have. I'm a therapist, so now I'm trained and I have that self awareness. But, for a guy that doesn't have those tools, that exposure in a social circle, or that relationship you feel safe in, how do you walk a guy through starting to name grief and then process it?
Here's what we do because we learned it, and it works. And it doesn't have to work for everyone, but we know this works because we know that men know that we're available and there's another resource in their life. We start off with, "Hey, Wes, I heard your dad died, and I wanted you to know I was thinking about you. It made me very sad because I know you talked about your dad all the time. And I wanted you to know, if you ever want to talk, I'm here to listen." Boom. We just set that whole thing up. I just told you I'm here to listen to you. I was sad that your father had died. And also want you to know, not that I'm going to be like, if you call me, if you need anything, call me, Wes. Now it's this. Now it's this. I'm going to check back in with you over the weekend or next week and see how you're doing. I'd like to take you for coffee. I'd like to come over to the house. Maybe we could go have dinner or something and just chat. Maybe go to a sports bar or whatever that looks like, right? Go for a walk. Maybe just go bowling. Maybe just go see a movie, you and I. Maybe just go for a run, because I know you like to run. You like to go for a bike ride. because now I'm just checking in with you. But I want you to know that you have another resource. And it's not just if it doesn't work out next week, just whenever you're available, Wes. It's Wes, if you can't go next weekend, well, let's check back in with you before March ends. And maybe you're busy until Easter, then I'll check back in April. So it's about checking in. It's about texting. It's about phone calls. It's about emails. And it's not now and then maybe in the summer. It's throughout to let this person know that you're not alone. And sometimes you're going to have those days, but I want to hear about your dad. I want to hear what's going on with you. I also had my dad die, so I have similar, you know, things going on in my life and in the past, but they're not exactly. So I just want to listen more about your dad. Did you guys do anything for the funeral? Did you do a memorial for him? Did you guys raise money? All the things, right? So I'm going to ask those questions succinctly. It only takes a couple of minutes. And then I'm going to keep checking in with you. And with these guys, going to coffee, going for a walk, getting on our bikes, going for a run with some of the guys, going to lunch. I saw a movie with one guy last fall. It was perfect because he is grieving. These guys are grieving on their own, and sometimes they are seeing a counselor or therapist, but they need just a little more. And I want them to know it's okay if you want to share. And then we invite them to the support groups in the meantime. The regular ones, by the way, are you seeing a counselor or therapist? Also, we're having support groups for men only, or for men and women who just want to get together and talk. We're also having a picnic, blah, blah, blah. It's just being resourceful. And it's subtle. We're friends. I heard that somebody died in your life, and I'm here to support you, but I'm also here to listen to you. We don't use the words, I want to talk with you, Wes. I heard that it's more like, hey, I want to catch up with you. I'm going to check in with you. I want to hear more about your dad. Whereas some people might shy away from that. I want to hear more about your dad, Wes. And with these other guys, it's like, that's kind of weird. Or, okay, no one's ever really asked me that. Or even my wife's not doing that. And she wouldn't understand because she's a woman and her parents are still alive. Or nobody died her parents didn't die when she was younger. There's so many different variables to it and stories. So that's just it, man. It's showing up, it's checking in, it's being available.
Take me back to many moons ago, 2002. You were a school counselor helping kids who had lost parents to suicide, cancer, and accidental death. And at the same time, you got a cancer diagnosis yourself. What was it like sitting with other people's grief while also facing your own mortality?
Well, the thought was in 2001 after 9/11. And all of a sudden, it took me about 6 months to a year to put it all together, 2002. But in 2001, the end of 2001, after 9/11, I was thinking about all these kids I was working with and staff I was working with that had death in the past that was unprocessed, especially the guys. Nobody wanted to talk about it. They had childhood trauma, their relationships had suffered, blah, blah, blah. So now I'm working with young boys and I'm thinking, wow, their dad is this, and they're experiencing abuse and divorce and incarceration already. Let me put some stuff together. At the time, it was called unresolved grief. It's no longer called unresolved grief. We use words like unprocessed grief, unaddressed grief, unacknowledged grief. And more men have it than women. Not that women don't have it. It's just we were raised differently than them, right? We love differently than them. We grieve differently than them. And there's different values and beliefs. And so as a man, I was like, I got to start helping these kids. So I started looking up how to help children who are grieving the death of someone. And then also, let's look at some loss, like someone's dying of cancer, there's a divorce, there's been abuse, they're in foster care. And I found this center in Portland, Oregon. It's called the Dougie Center for Children, Teens, and Adults. I wanted to do loss and death, but this was specifically death, with 9/11 being really heavy on my heart. Living in Reno, it happened in New York. Reno, Nevada, it happened in New York. I started thinking about my own life. I never processed the death of my father, the abandonment and abuse of my mother. She left me when I was 12. My dad died when I was 10. So I just kept going. I kept going. It's like, I don't need to talk about it. I'm an athlete, and no one's talking about this stuff. Nobody wanted to hear my story. Fast forward many, many, many years, dealing with childhood trauma and working with men and children. And it just didn't really talk about, didn't feel comfortable, especially the culture. I was working with 85% Latinos in the middle school and elementary school. I felt it was time. In 2002, before that new year, right after 9/11, I felt like I'm going to start a nonprofit. We need to talk about this stuff. At the same time, I got the healing as well. I started talking to other men and listening to other men talk about some of their stuff. And we started meeting men that when their spouse or child died just recently, like, around 2000, never grieved their parent, their girlfriend, or a friend in the 80s or 90s. So I'm like, wow, I'm on to something. So long story short, now we're 24 years into this, and we're learning so much about culture, religion, and people who are grieving the deaths of someone. And it's really providing the space and listening without assuming or judging or telling them, I know exactly how you feel, Wes. When I was a kid, my dad died too. So it's just been an amazing journey, and I'm so privileged to this stuff. Just I'm learning. It's just lessons learned, Wes. That's the biggest thing.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing all of that. It's quite a lot to process at the same time. And especially when you are doing the healing work, there can be this potential imposter syndrome or just this psychological split, right? Because you want to be available for someone else, but you want to feel like people are available for you. And you're speaking to this time period in the 2000s. I'm wondering, it's still true today that men tend to have a lot of more unprocessed grief. Do you think this is just a universally or historically consistent truth about men, or do you think there was a time in history that maybe informed that shift where men stopped processing grief?
I see it more now being taken care of and supportive only because it's on our phones now, and men can talk to other men about it, about someone who died, whether it was a musician, an actor, an actress, or someone in their own life. They're feeling a little more comfortable. Hey, and it's better than nothing. I think social media has helped a lot. It's on TV now for people who watch TV. But Wes, more now than ever, there's support groups. I run support groups in the evenings and during the day for men nationally, let alone we have our own support group in our organization for adults. So there's more resources. And I think men are starting to feel like I can talk about this a little more. We're not going to learn everything. We're not going to get all the information, especially from the first responders. It's new to some people. People are like, well, I'll give it a try. We always say at least try it 3 times. But we're seeing more and more men are giving it a try because historically, the way we were raised, how their grandparents raised those adults who now were the parent, children of those parents, it was just never talked about. And we're talking about it a little more each time because it's in our face. Like I said, the phone, social media, and on television. And then open conversations when a man has a spouse die or their mom is sick or a friend died or even an athlete or an actor died and they don't even know who they are, but they were like, wow, they took their life, or I can't believe they got killed in a car accident. And I've heard men talk about even just the USA hockey team with the guy who played hockey who was killed by a drunken driver on his bike. He was supposed to be on that team. Men are talking about it. They're feeling more comfortable. And that's a sports related story. It's like, wow, I can't believe he was a hockey player and he died. Well, yeah, accidents happen. So now conversations are being, presented and open and supportive. And then lastly, just with that, women model that for men. And women are trying to like, tell me a little more about your feelings. It's not going to happen overnight. But it's the start of a conversation that is part of growth and healing and grieving.
Yeah, I agree as well. I think it is becoming more normalized both in general and in relationships. If you're in a heterosexual relationship, the average woman you're with is going to expect you to have some sort of self awareness, at least to acknowledge, what's happened to you.
Yeah.
It's funny. I still think it's true that the beginning awareness of that usually starts with the woman telling you, at least in my therapy work, it's like I get a guy who comes in like, oh yeah, my girlfriend, my wife, fiance said I should probably get some help. But I do think it is becoming more and more initiated by men. But there is this interesting understanding of grief. It feels very mysterious, abstract. And I'm just curious, I know there's been times in my life where I think the true definition would be that I was grieving, but it showed up in ways like stress and anger or being tired. How would you put language to defining grief, one, and then two, some of the different ways grief shows up versus like a death or a divorce or a job loss or something like that, you know?
First, grief is a big word. It takes space, it takes time, it takes energy. It's a feeling word. Grief is a feeling, and grief is what we feel on the inside of our body, whereas mourning is grieving on the outside of our body, right? We're mourning something, hair color, clothes, jewelry, tattoos, whereas grief's more so internal and it affects us, our sleep, our relationships, our conversation. And sometimes if we don't normalize that and we stuff that, we pay for it as a, as humans. We pay for that in our lives through work, our relationship with our children, our relationship maybe with our parents, productivity in the workplace, health, stress, eating, drinking. It's just there's a lot of things that just that grief piece by not doing it. I'm not saying the proper way because we all grieve differently, but not, and it's not a time thing, it's a grieving thing. I read a book in 1938. It was super cool. It said, the best way to grieve is to grieve. I'm like, whoa, what? Because in the 60s, the 5 stages of grief came out. But people are like, no, we need to grieve this out. Let's grieve. And the second part of your question, could you repeat that, please, Wes?
Yeah. There's several different types of grief you've already, or should I say, grief shows up in many different ways, obviously, based on the context in which it occurs. And you've already mentioned things like getting sick, dying, divorce, or a disconnect in relationship. Then there's disappointment or transition in life. Can you just describe how grief shows up differently based on the context in which it's presented?
Yeah, and so grief shows up in our moods, our behaviors, in our relationships, again at the workplace. And it's not like starting from children all the way to adults. It's not like they're not grieving. We should never underestimate a child's ability to grieve. When their dad dies, their sibling dies, their dog dies, they're grieving. It's just they've only been on the earth for 7 or 9 years, right? They just have these feelings. They know something's missing. And then they look for adults for the modeling piece. And the adults are like, well, let's not talk about it. Let's just get another dog. Or I never really processed my grief. And it's okay. The dog was in a car accident or it had cancer. And there's really no other conversations about it. And so it shows up in how parents parent their kids, it shows up in relationships, it shows up and sometimes in the workplace, right? Productivity. I mean, grief's coming to work anyway, even if they take 3 days off or 3 weeks off, 3 days to 3 weeks, it's still coming back to work. And they're just not showing up. People that don't process this correctly, it just shows up at work. It shows up in relationships, anger, drinking, other addictions. Even in the sporting world, it's like they're humans first, athletes and actors and actresses. They're humans first, and they're stuffing things, and they think that part of this work, like playing sports and exercising and being a musician, that it's just going to go away. But eventually it just catches up, and it catches up in their emotions, their feelings, and some destruct and some self-destruct. Destruct towards others. That's the mass shootings and school shootings from what we've learned. But it also self-destruction. They can't handle it so much. They didn't have the tools. They're hurting inside. They're grieving inside. They don't know what to do with this feeling, this emotion. It might be new, or there's so much grief from the past. They're just like, it caught up to them. And now it's affecting everything they do, their sleep, their performance, their relationships, the way they eat. Now they've picked up another addiction, their friendships, work productivity, their families, affairs, separations. I mean, it just eventually catches up. Grief is so cyclical, and it'll show up the rest of our lives. There's no magic ending. So it just shows up in our lives in different ways, because we all grieve differently. We come from different households.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And, as you're talking about, I guess what I would call the symptomology of unprocessed grief, right? It's not just a drinking problem or, just relationship issues. To your point, it's very much that undealt with loss. I was struck by several things you said. The first one is the ability to follow up and check in, something that is just unfortunately so rare in today's world. We sadly think now it's just appropriate to act like not following up consistently or putting forth any effort is the norm or the standard. I mean, this is really a problem in dating relationships with people ghosting each other, seeing it as entertainment. But I think what you said is so powerful because you're not leaving it in this abstract, generic, let's talk or whenever you're available. It's what I would call healthy assertiveness. You're just saying, like, hey, I'm secure enough in who I am to not feel weird or wrong for engaging with you to this degree because what I'm desiring to engage with you on is that important and needs a check-in consistency to match that. Like, it would be strange if you knew my dad died and treated it like I just told you I got a bad grade on a test or, I had a bad day at work. Like, I appreciate that you are seeing the value in that person to which mirrors that level of check-in. And for guys listening, it may feel weird to say, well, I don't want to be a burden. I don't want him to think I'm weird or all this stuff. But it seems like to your point, yeah, the person listening might initially have a bit of like, at least, oh, I've never had that before. But in my experience, everyone has always been thankful and they've always taken me up on it. And so I think you just have to ride out that little weird,
Mhm,
insecure kind of
mhm,
questioning. But once you go
mhm.
past that, I really do think that guys are available and that people they want to be known, right? These guys are truly craving for that. And I'm curious how you help guys do that as far as sharing with friends because obviously you're a professional, you have a lot of experience, and I appreciate that script you gave. So for any guy listening, listen to that part. He just gave a step by step on how to start asking about grief. But what about sharing grief? What if a guy's going through stuff and he's like, I don't know where to begin. How much do I share? Or what do I share? How do I know someone's safe enough to share? How do you guide a guy through that?
It's all about scripts because we've learned them, and we have to understand if someone tells us, and one of the things I'm using right now in my speaking engagements is don't miss the moment. So Wes, you just talked about your dad dying. So now I'm going to let you know I'm sad that your dad had died. I don't use the word sorry. There's other things that we can say because I know that you've probably heard, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. So we're finding other ways. They're all scripts, but we're finding other ways instead of saying, I'm sorry. And sometimes you don't have to say anything to let you know that I heard you, but I'm also available to you. So one of the things that we're doing is that we've learned from guys is we know that when you tell me this, I'm going to check in with you. I'm going to reach out to you. And I know that we're not going to share within the next week or two because you're busy with work, you got your family, but I'm going to keep checking in with you. I'm going to keep letting you know I'm here to listen to you. And anytime you want to talk, here's it's called magic in the grieving world. Anytime you're ready to talk, I'm here to listen because you're not ready maybe right now, Wes. At the same time, hey, can we just go to coffee? I love this opener. We don't have to talk about your dad. I just want to see if you just want to go to coffee, just reconnect. And I told you my dad died earlier on too. It's not about that. I just feel like, man, a lot of people are going to it's going to be hard for them to understand that your dad died unless they had a parent die. And your family's going to understand as much about your grieving process, and so is your work. And nobody really wants to hear it, but I do. And I call it, not that I name the word, but it's called being doers. Being a doer and saying, hey, can you go out next week and next week, and just keeps getting passed on. It's like, well, I'm still going to be available. I'm still going to check in. And it's not even work because it's just a natural. If this is what you want to do, not everyone's going to do it. It's just part of the contribution to help a friend or a family member who's going through something that either you kind of know something about or you don't know nothing at all. That's how we have to change the way we support each other when someone's died because they hold on to that. And when I tell educators, when a child comes up to you and says, hey, my mom died, or I'm not feeling well because my dog is sick, like they're going to die, or auntie is sick, don't miss the moment because when a child or an adult comes to you and shares that information with you, it could have been the first time. What are you going to do with it? Or the seventh time and no one listened. So you better be able to do something because now we're saving lives. I truly believe after 24 years of this, when someone comes and tells you, we're saving lives and we're like, let's see how I can help. Because why are they telling us? Do they like us? Do they know that we're going to listen? Do they know that we're available because we've put that out there? And that's what's been the magic piece of helping guys and other people, but help each other. It's normalizing, it's listening, but it's also supporting.
Yeah, super helpful. Let's say a guy is out there thinking, a kid, I believe, kids a little more easily share. Obviously, if they've had rejection or ostracization early on, maybe a bit tougher time, but kids just express their emotions a lot more free. For a guy listening that says, hey, I'm easy for that kid to say, I'm not saying he would judge the kid, but essentially, hey, I struggle. I don't know even where to begin. Even if someone were to be a safe place and do all those right things, how do I even begin to talk about what's happened to me? How do you walk a guy through those first steps of, the death happens, the divorce happens, the job loss happens, and then, he says, "What do I do with it?"
What do I do with it for another adult or their own child or children?
With another adult, like, so let's say they need to process it with another adult, whether that's their spouse, their friends, or their family. How do you walk them through the beginning of starting to healthily grieve what's happened to them?
And so then it's reaching out to someone that they know that will listen to them. So if in this case, if it's me and I'm having a tough time, but I know that you're available and I know you're busy, but you're a friend of mine, right? And then I would reach out and say, "Hey, Wes, I'm having a tough time. I was wondering if you could go to coffee with me," because that's how simple it is. It's being comfortable, being uncomfortable with, "Wes, can we just go have coffee or go for a walk, or can we go to a restaurant after work and just kind of talk about some things? Some things are happening to me in my life personally and with my wife, so and so, or even with my parent, and I'm an adult. And I just wanted to talk to someone." That person, me in this case, will know if you're available and if you're a true friend. Will know that I can lean on you or tell you some things that are super important. And I'm probably going to ask you right now, it's just between you and me, but I just really would like to know if you could, if I could spend some time with you. I want to share some things with you. That's the piece of reaching out to people that you trust, that know that will listen to you. And it's not so much getting the advice or opinions, but it's some suggestions. We know now, 24 years later, we don't know what people that we work with, even family members that we're not too close to or friends that have had a death when they were younger. We don't know everyone's story. I'm finding out just from some of my coaching friends that they had their wife had a miscarriage, but they like, I got to keep coaching. And I'm like, wow. So it's sensitive to them. And sometimes they're like, well, actually, the anniversary is coming up this weekend. So that's the thing by being available. Those things open up because there's a relationship. This is all about relationship building and connections. And so that's what these guys should be. Not should be, because we don't want to should on anyone, right? We don't want to should on anyone. But these are some suggestions for like how can I help or how can I get help? And it's just trying it out. Yeah, I love how you said it, Wes. I said it from the very beginning when we started this 24 years ago. We're asking you to come to an organization where we get to talk and share about our loved ones. By the way, if you want to bring in cremations or pictures or jewelry or t-shirts, I mean, 6-year-olds were bringing Led Zeppelin t-shirts in. You can share them if you want. And if not, no worries. So they would just show up with stuff and like, who wants to share it? And that's what opened up everything because we built this relationship on just want to see, we just want to hear more about your dad or your brother. And we're here to listen to you. So bring it. And that's gonna get a little weird because it's weird. We're talking about death and no one else is talking about it, but we are. And then it just, the rest is history 24 years later. Okay, because teens said to us and adults said to us, that's weird. We sit around and talk to each other about our losses. I go, yeah. Well, I'm going to counseling. I go, okay, but you're going to find the commonality normalcy with others. They're experiencing some similar things. And that's how we got them to buy in. Attend 3 times. Try it. Try it 3 times. It's free. And that's what started it.
Yeah, I love that you just outright named it. It is gonna be weird because it is weird for society, unfortunately, but it's only weird in and as far as the lack of exposure to it is there, right? And then once you're in it, I mean, like you said, it really is magic. And I agree too. I think that, as a therapist, I do appreciate when people come to me But, you need that communal space. You need to hear your story or your sense of something in someone else. And this is why I think Al-Anon groups or Nar-Anon, for recovery, like families of those people are so powerful because, it's like it's so complicated. Everyone's different. You're in my estimation, you're kind of just looking for that one story or that one perspective that's like, boom, that's it. That's me. I needed to hear that. And you're only going to get that in the collective. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing, as you were talking, I was just thinking, I think so much of men's struggle to grieve is really the lack of depth in the friendships to begin with to process it. I've done quite a few therapy intakes, and, one thing I'm always just struck by is, there's a social history section where you just talk about your friends and people, almost everyone says, yeah, I have, friends. But then I've started to ask, let me like really get a sense of the depth of friendship. So I started to ask, okay, if something really painful or difficult were to happen to you and you need to pick up the phone, how many people could you call? And every time it's crazy, that number, let's say it's five, drops to either two or one or zero. And I had a really sad one the other day where this guy's experiencing pretty intense depression and suicidal ideation. He's been with someone for 9 years, right? A partner. And he just said, I can't talk to her about it. This is the first time I'm talking about it here. And I think I'm just struck by that. For any guy listening,
Yes.
Emilio you're giving these tools, which is so powerful. But I would
Thank
say
you.
you need to backtrack. You're welcome. That you need to backtrack and start with, man, but where are my friendships now? How do I even have the relationships to be able to express and practice these tools that you're giving us? And that's a tough question to ask, but I would say that's the foundation. That's the start. Build those safe relationships and then implement these tools and get going and practice.
Absolutely. And again, it's 2026. It's in our face all the time. We're hearing about it. We don't want to be a part of that study that was happened in 2012 and 2019 that said most people who are dying, the number one thing is they have regrets and they wish they were able to show more emotions or voice their opinions more. And these are people in the 70s and 80s. And I'm not saying it's too late, but it's late at that time because there's so much that's been lost. So much.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
we
no,
need to reach out.
I agree. I think I appreciate how you're not shying away from the fact that we need to learn from these painful situations because so much, well, it depends on the culture you're raised in. Before we got on, we were talking about your background and where you're from. And that is something I'm curious about actually. And I meant to ask you is, based on the culture you're from, I'm curious how grieving shows up. Oftentimes I hear, I have some Jewish clients. Obviously, there's Shiva and being able to sit Shiva. But, for a lot of especially white American families, grieving is very passive. It's very put it under the rug. It's very much bury it, don't talk about it. This kind of like avoidance, I would say. So I'm curious, how would you describe grieving showing up in different cultures that you've seen and working with men throughout the years?
Yeah. Cultures and religions and families. We've learned so much for 24 years. And a lot of it is the differences in not grieving. A lot of it is the other side is traditions and rituals because the United States is so young compared to, the Philippines and Europe. We just grieve so differently than them. Being born and raised Catholic, when my father died when I was 10, I was lied to about his death. I found out when I was 24 that he was drinking and driving, and he killed. That's how he died. But in when I was 10, they said that he was just in an accident, and they didn't want to talk about it. But thought I was too young to go attend a funeral or be a part of that. We get so many. I mean, we suggest so many kids to be a part of that funeral, memorial, Shiva, celebration of life. Get them involved because they're curious. They want to know. I've got so many stories of ones that weren't involved, and those surviving adults paid for it, and they will pay for it when they find out how they really died or why weren't they involved in the memorial service. Because of culture and religion, people are going to do what they do, and sometimes they don't believe children need to be involved, but those surviving adults, they pay for it later. And the kids want to know why they were lied to. All those years, I'm like, that's it. He was just died of a car accident. Every time I shared, I don't know, they said my dad died of a car accident, but they never shared. And I didn't even go to the funeral. So all those years from 10 to 24. And then I found out when I was 24, and I was angry, man, as a young adult. And here's what they said to me. It's just, you were so young and we didn't want to scare you. Well, you didn't scare. If you would have just said a car accident, that would have been fine. But you said accident. Then, teachable moment from you, he was drinking and driving. So I didn't know that he had alcohol problem, and he was always drinking and driving. Now, remember, this was in the 70s, and he died in the 80s. And so everybody grieves differently, and the families are affected differently. I remember one of my first families that ever I met with. One was Latino, one was Samoan, and Latinos were trying to build this memorial. The Latino family just had a hard time with the Samoan family and how they did things with music and an altar, and Latinos with the altar, but the Samoans with music and food and just a time to grieve and a long wake. And it was just, it was tough. And they're like, okay, dad just died. Let's get the children involved and let's see how we can do half and half. But they're like, we don't do it that way. But we struggled with that early on, and we learned lessons from that. And when we do things now with families, we bring scripts, suggestions, not you should do this and you should do that. But here's some things we've learned. What do you guys think? So you guys are, Mexican, and they're Samoan, or they're African American. What if some things you've done in the past? What are some things you'd like to do? Let's ask the children and the teens, what do they want to do? And it's so awesome to bring everybody together, almost like at a funeral home. This is what's going to happen. What do you guys kind of want to do? There's so much turmoil and friction because they have to make a decision now. Whereas when we're at a table, we're like, these are some things that we want to do. Let's ask each other. Let's try and incorporate a couple little things, but also let's ask the children so they can also remember their parent, grandparent, or sibling in this way, to let them know that our heritage, our culture, and our religion, this is how we did things. And it's just eye-opening to these children who will grieve, who the start of their grieving process, it's a foundation, who will take this idea, and as they get older will remember. And that's what we're doing. We're helping build that foundation for these young children, because someday they'll be teenagers, they'll be 20s, they'll be in the 40s, they'll have families. That's the whole piece of it. And that's what's worked for us. Not like, well, there's more of a Latino side than this side because not everybody could make it from the Samoa Islands. So let's just do it more this way because this is how the Mexicans do it, or the Latinos do it. So that's just it. It's listening to everyone and seeing how we can come together. We haven't had too many problems because everybody wants to do it their way because they did this when their dad died when they were younger. But not all whites are married to whites anymore, right? And so that's what I pretty much tell people. That's how we're going to learn from each other. Even though now with someone dying, we get to learn more about heritage and culture and religion and beliefs. Let's put this together, make this really nice, because remember, those children are watching, and those children will someday be an adult. And so that's how we've done it in the past.
Yeah.
That's worked.
Yeah, I mean, I think starting with desiring to understand and listen, which you gave that advice even when you're just talking to an individual who's grieving. But you're right, there's so much history and ritual, expectations, perspectives, ideology that's caught up in that. But to your point, we have to remember ultimately why we're there is to honor and grieve and process the loss of that life. And what you said about kids too, I couldn't agree more. I've heard it said you want to be as honest as possible, age appropriately as honest as possible. And obviously you're not going to go into all these details, right? But at 10, and you said this earlier about kids, so much smarter and more aware than we want to give credit. And that's probably why the education system's going down the shitter, right? Because we're babysitting these kids when really it's like, kids understand complex things. And if they don't, they actually have the humility to usually just say, I don't, I don't get it, which we don't as adults. But I think that's right. You are modeling how to process something. And if you weren't even invited to the funeral, what other emotion besides anger could show up? That anger is showing the injustice of what's wrong that needs to be made right. It's the protection, like, hey, I missed that moment that I should have been there for, and now I can't get that back. It's like a reinvigorating grieving that you shouldn't have had to gone through, ironically, because they didn't let you go through the initial grieving process. And now you're having to do it not only later, but in a lens that is more difficult to do because it's you know, retroactive. So I appreciate you sharing that. And for anyone listening out there, whether you want kids, whether you have kids, or whether you're around kids, I think that is such a good understanding that, we are always modeling for other people the truth. And as society, that's what we deem as normal, not normal. You look around, okay, if other people are doing it, et cetera. And guys out there listening, you have an opportunity to be empowered to be the model for grieving, for your partner, for your kids, for your friends to say, we're going to be in this thing. I'm not really sure about what it's going to be like. And I don't have all the answers, but let's, like you said earlier, show up and see what comes up, I think is the big thing. I'm curious then, we've talked about the truce of grieving. You've helped us define what grieving is. You've told us how it shows up, uh, particularly in men and different contexts in which we tend to find ourselves grieving. What are some myths and misunderstandings about grieving that you've heard throughout the years?
That children don't grieve because they're too young. Let's start at the foundation. They're just too young. They're not gonna understand, the funeral, the memorial, what cremation is, and, let's not get them involved. Even in 2026, not having young children be involved, that's a huge myth that children don't understand, right? Also, they need to know this isn't a myth. People also need to know that children grieve differently than teens and young adults and adults. We just all grieve differently. Some of the myths is to get a child involved in a funeral, memorial, or shiva, depending on the family, right, of the beliefs and the structured religion or education of the family traditions, rituals, that they don't know how to grieve or they wouldn't understand. It kind of goes with the first one. Maybe they're just too young, they wouldn't understand. Grief lasts a lifetime. Some people think that they can just stuff grief and it eventually go over because they're in a new relationship or they have a step parent or their parent was abusive and they hate them. Now there's lots of anger, there's lots of hate about when an adult dies for a child that's now an adult that has their own family. But I have to say, as much as my parents were abusive and my dad died at an early age and my mother left me, abandoned me, and she died a few years ago, I still talk about him and I don't hate him anymore. I'm not angry. I'm just not happy with what they did. I still share stories that I can remember as a child because they gave me life. And again, it's a teachable moment. It's sharing. It's letting others know I'm not bitter. I've totally I'm okay with it. A little more mature, a little more wiser. But I've had all this to grow from it, which I don't know if I wasn't doing this work, if I wouldn't have let it all go. I think it would have just still affected my relationships.
Mm.
Grief is never ending. A lot of times people think that it's just going to go away, and let's not talk about the person who died in another relationship. But it just shows up because, like I said earlier on in the show, music, food, memories. I call them grief bursts. I put the words together because I heard and I thought this is great. But a grief burst could happen anytime in a car, a memory, a sunset, music. I mean, food smells. And people just don't think that grief always shows up. But all those men who are with those women and all those women who are with those men who are now in new relationships because a man or woman died, trust me, trust me. I've been saying we've seen thousands of adults. They still think about the person that was in their life, even though they died and they're in another relationship. I'm just telling you, they still think about that person because that was the father and mother of these children or the relationship. Or when they went to Hawaii, this is the second time now, but they went to Hawaii either the first time or several times with their spouse. And now it's a new person. They're still thinking about that person. And there's nothing wrong with that.
I mean, yeah, how could you not, right? That relationship was real, it was significant, it mattered, you can't blot it out. And Yeah, it seems like there can be some internalized shame, like, oh, I should be over this person, or I don't want to make the new person feel bad or feel like I'm comparing them. But there's no comparison, right? Obviously, those are two different lives that happen, and the way that you engage with them is different as well. So I appreciate you walking us through those myths. And I'm curious, as a last question here, what's on the other side of grief? What's the hope? What's your kind of brochure pitch to say, you know what, this is why grieving is worth it. Here's what's on the other side for so many people. And this is why, if you haven't done it or haven't done it to the degree that maybe you feel like you need to, here's why you should.
It's a great question. When we show up for people, whether it's in a personal relationship or even a collegial or a family member, and we show up and we have those connections or we need to strengthen a connection because of maybe bad blood back in the day, it strengthens the relationship moving forward. We don't get today back. So a lot of it is, let's talk about it. I know we're not going to find out everything about how you're feeling about it right now, whether it was good or bad, how the person died. But we're gonna learn to live with this because that's what grief is. We're learning to live with this. We're not getting over it. But I'm gonna learn a little more about your ex, mom, your sister. That's all it is. It's building connections. It's letting people know that you're here to listen, and there's a time for that. It's not like, okay, right now, but there's a time to listen and build those connections, but strengthen relationships. That's why we moved a lot of this in the sporting world. Athletes and musicians and artists, they're all human first, no matter what, because they were humans before all the things they're doing now as a professional athlete or even a CEO. But there will come a time in your life when you're alone or when someone else dies or when something's happening to your company or not going very well in your life athletically or professionally, that you'll be thinking about what's happened in the past because it wasn't processed, and it'll affect you for the rest of your life. So a lot of it is listen, be supportive, reach out, and be available. And that's what we're trying to do in the workplace, in the athletic world, in the music world, and in the schools.
Yeah, it's so simple, so profound, and certainly so transformational. So, yeah, thank you for sharing all of your wisdom and insight today. And I'm just curious where people can find your work. Well, I'm so glad you did. Mr. Rogers is a hero of mine, not just because we both wear cardigans, but, truly just his approach. And yeah, I just think the way that you frame that is so powerful, because so many guys listening will say, well, I don't know how, or where do I start? And what you're essentially saying is we all have to learn. We all have to start somewhere. That somewhere is from the beginning, and it starts with listening. And, Emilio, I think it's just so profound and so necessary for every guy to take away. And I know I'll be sitting with that quote. So thank you for sharing it. Yes, absolutely. And we'll put your work in the show notes. And guys, until next time.